happy little games. If you are enjoying this series or any of my content, please be sure and give me a thumbs up. It really helps with the Google Analytics and I really would appreciate it. Thank you. Hello everybody, and thanks for coming back for the History of Castlevania Part 4. Sorry for the 2-week delay, but I was a little bit burnt out with all the garlic, neck biting, and holy water, similar to my honeymoon. But enough hubbub, let's get on with the show. In 2008, Castlevania Order of Ecclesia was released for the Nintendo DS. This would be the last Castlevania game for the system, and despite it being extremely difficult, it's still one of the best for the unit. As the story goes, the game takes place in the late 1800s, sometime after Symphony of the Night. Dracula has been vanquished, and the Belmont clan has disappeared. Various splinter groups have been assembled to create countermeasures for Dracula's eventual return. One of these organizations is called the Order of Ecclesia, and its leader, as chosen by its member, is a woman by the name of Shinoa. This is the first time you get to take on the role of a female as the lead character since the game Castlevania Legends, in which you got to play as Sonia Belmont. Shinoa has the ability to absorb magical powers called glyphs. Right after Shinoa uses the powerful Dominus glyph, Dracula is vanquished temporarily. A mysterious character by the name of Albus rises up and steals the powerful glyph. There are plot twists amundo, so I won't spoil it here. Using a similar card system from Circle of the Moon, certain enemies will drop glyphs. These icons can be equipped to your back or arms, allowing you to perform powerful attacks. There are over 100 different glyphs that you can pick up. They do use something called magic points, but once the gauge is depleted, you have to wait for it to recharge. Weak attacks such as the sword doesn't use as much MP, but the more powerful ones can only be used a couple of times before your bar has to regenerate. There is also something called the Glyph Union, which features the most powerful attack in the game, but it depletes your hearts when using it. You can also combine 2 glyphs at once for some nice dual wielding action. While doing this, if you tap the buttons back and forth with the proper rhythm, you will unleash an extremely powerful series of combos which do not take any time to regenerate. The layout of the game is similar to Simon's Quest on the NES. This is actually the first Metroidvania game to allow you to explore areas outside of the castle. You can only proceed to a new area after completing the task in the one you are currently in. There are also various side quests you can complete in the game. The graphics are probably the best I've seen since Symphony of the Night. The animation is nice and smooth, and the character sprites are colorful and detailed. The backgrounds feature some of the best pixel art on the system and are extremely detailed. One of the coolest aspects of the games are the various bosses that you fight. All of them are completely new, with none of them being recycled from old games, with the exception being Death and Dracula. Some of the bosses you will encounter include a giant crab near a lighthouse, a gigantic wolf shadow, and also a giant centaur creature which takes up 1/4 of the screen. These are very difficult and will take you out in 3 or 4 hits until you learn the patterns. The music is a bit different from previous games, almost sounding a bit mature and refined, although still catchy. Upon completing the game, there is a boss rush mode, as well as being able to play on a harder difficulty. You can also play as Albus, who uses guns as his primary weapon. You can also unlock additional content after being linked up with Castlevania Judgment on the Nintendo Wii, which I will talk about later in the series. Overall, it's an excellent game with great playability. 2010, Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth was released as a digital-only WiiWare release. This was developed by M2 and is created in the style of the original NES games. The story is not very elaborate, with you having to defeat Dracula and all of his minions. The game is sort of patterned after the Game Boy title The Castlevania Adventure, with some of the same enemies and also the ability to transform your vampire killer into one that shoots flames. The game takes place across 6 levels with a brand new boss to fight at the end of each one. The gameplay feels like the original Castlevania with nice tight controls. One change in the controls is the ability to change directions in mid-jump. They have also included branching paths, which if used properly, let you bypass mid-level bosses. The animation and pixel work is absolutely classic Castlevania, with the quality being just above the 16-bit Super Nintendo. The level design is really well done, but the only problem is they all sort of blend together and do tend to get a bit boring. The music though was fantastic, being composed by Manobu Namiki. He designed these tunes in the late 80s to 90s Konami style. There are multiple difficulties, although to encounter the true final boss you have to play it on the harder difficulty. There is no password or save system, although you can input a code to unlock a level select. Overall, the game is geared toward the casual player, and any Castlevania fan will enjoy it. On the surface, it's fun to play with, but on the inside, it lacks depth. Similar to my ex-girlfriend. "2011 brought us Castlevania Lords of Shadow for the Xbox 360, PS3, and a few years later for the PC. This is a complete reboot of the series, which takes place in Southern Europe during the Middle Ages. You take on the role of Gabriel Belmont, a knight who is part of the Holy Brotherhood of Light, whose clan is charged with protecting people from demons. Gabriel's wife Marie is murdered, but due to the various dark entities enveloping the world, her soul lies between life and death. He learns of an artifact called the God Mask, which can resurrect the dead, but it's been shattered and has been spread across the territory. You have to set out on a quest to retrieve each of the pieces, rescue Marie's soul, and save humanity. Instead of the vampire killer, you wield the combat cross, which has a retractable chain and the ability to unlock 40 different combos. Direct attacks to single enemies are more powerful, however, when surrounded by enemies it switches to a weaker attack. Your whip can also interact with sub-weapons such as holy water and knives. One new sub-weapon are the fairies, which will distract enemies, and also a dark crystal, which must be assembled by obtaining rare pieces of it. Once completed, it will call upon a demon to attack all nearby enemies. Speaking of enemies, there are various brand new ones in this game, plus you have the ability to tame certain ones, such as spiders and trolls, which you have to ride to get past certain obstacles. The gameplay was dubbed a cinematic action platformer, which plays very similar to God of War and Uncharted. You can unlock new moves and attacks by spending your well-earned XP points. Although the gameplay is similar to God of War, you have to use a bit more skill while playing. For example, if you kill enemies without taking damage, it will increase your combo meter. There is also a counter-attack meter, which will block an enemy's attack. Use this at the right time and it will immediately max out the combo gauge. The platforming feels very much like Uncharted, but this time you use your whip as a grappling hook. There are lots of puzzles to solve in the game, and some of them are a bit difficult. Various sections, including some of the boss fights, include QuickTime events. The graphics are absolutely phenomenal, especially the bosses. They are giant and take over multiple screens in some cases. The only problem with these fantastic graphics are the performance issues, as a lot of times it tends to cripple the system, causing slowdown and choppy gameplay. The PC version, which came out a few years later, is much more smoother. The music has a western flair to it and doesn't sound like any previous Castlevania. While technically it's very good, it just doesn't have that gothic feel that I'm looking for when I'm playing these types of games. One cool aspect of the game is the narration of your compatriot Zobek, which was done by Patrick Stewart. Some might say it's a bit cheesy, but I always enjoyed them. There are 12 chapters in the game and 2 DLC chapters you can purchase. While the level designs are diverse, they are extremely long and tend to go on for hours at a time. While this doesn't feel like a Castlevania game aside from a guy brandishing a whip, it's still fun to play despite its flaws. In 2013, Castlevania Lords of Shadow Mirror of Fate was released for the Nintendo 3DS. You take on the role of 4 characters this time around. The prologue starts out with Gabriel. It then fast forwards several years to Simon Belmont. Simon is the son of Trevor, who left on a crusade to invade Dracula's castle but never returned. Now fully grown, Simon follows in dear old dad's footsteps to take his revenge. He ends up being followed by a vampire who turns out to be Alucard. At this point, you take on the role of Alucard and follow his plotline. Eventually, the story will revert back to Trevor and reveals how their quest ties together. Rather than the third-person perspective used in the original Lords of Shadow, a 2.5D perspective is used and looks really good. As soon as I started playing though, I had to stop and go visit my optometrist to purchase a new set of glasses because the viewpoint is zoomed way out. It's a bit off-putting at first, but eventually you do get used to it. There are elements of Metroidvania thrown in. Once again, your primary weapon is the combat cross, with you having to string together combos while dodging and blocking enemy attacks. Taking out enemies in the same way gets a bit repetitive, and honestly, after a few hours tends to get boring. There are quick time events as well, which breaks up the monotony quite nicely. Killing enemies adds to your XP, which will slowly level up your player. This will give you the option of upgrading your whip, allowing you to kill the enemy slightly faster, but doesn't add any more techniques. Each character has 2 magical powers they can call upon. Simon uses the spirit of Belnades to restore health and protect against acid waterfalls. The other magical spirit he can use is Reinhardt, who will shoot powerful arrows. Alucard can use the power of mist to heal himself, or use the power of a werewolf. Trevor uses light and dark magic to restore health or improve attack power. Each character has 2 sub-weapons such as axes, oil flasks, a stopwatch, boomerangs, and electric bombs. The only way to replenish the use of your sub-weapons is to smash the barrels littered throughout the game, which are filled with hearts. There are candles in the game, but unfortunately, whipping them does nothing. Speaking of the whip, all 3 characters use the combat cross as their primary weapon. As if this wasn't bad enough, they all have identical movesets. There are some nice platform elements in the game, which again feels like Uncharted more than classic Castlevania. There are very little hidden items to find and almost no alternate routes. As I mentioned, the graphics are very detailed with some of the best sprite work on the 3DS. The backgrounds in particular have a dark, macabre look to them, which makes it feel like classic Castlevania. The boss battles are fantastic with some really unique designs. The only downside is that the boss fights tend to take too long, but they are rather easy. The frame rate, on the other hand, is absolutely terrible. The game will often stutter at the worst times, especially during combat. The controls are fairly good, although they do take a bit of getting used to. Every time you use your whip, you take a step forward, which makes it difficult to dodge projectiles. Thankfully, there are 2 checkpoints per level, which does help immensely. The music is pretty good with a nice gothic vibe, but nothing too memorable. Later in 2013, an HD version was released for PS3, Xbox 360, and Windows. The Windows version ran at a silky smooth 60 frames per second as opposed to 30 that all other versions ran at. In 2014 brought us Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2 for the Xbox 360, PS3, and PC. During the epilogue, Gabriel has now been fully transformed into Dracula, who awakens in the modern era. Gabriel is awoken from a long nap with no recollection of how he got there. The only thing he wants to do is die, but being immortal, he cannot. Zobek is in possession of the vampire killer, which is the only thing that can kill Dracula. Gabriel has to team up with his former enemy to take down an even larger threat, the big red dead Satan himself, who is on the verge of resurrection and is looking to destroy the world. The game switches back to a third-person perspective, which features an open world instead of a chapter-by-chapter basis. Right off the bat, you'll notice that the camera has been totally redesigned and is now user-controlled. Your main weapon is the Shadow Whip, which is pretty much equal in power to the Combat Cross. There are 2 new weapons this time around, each one having their own unique combo system. The Void Sword, which uses the power of ice to restore your health, and also the Chaos Claws, which can destroy shields. Your secondary attacks include bombs, daggers, distracting enemies with bats, and being able to turn into mist. You can also shapeshift into rats to hide from enemies, possessing enemies for a few seconds so you can pass through secure doors, and drinking blood of your enemies to partially replenish your health. It's good old-fashioned family-friendly entertainment. Other items you can find include a clock which will slow down time, the Talisman of the Dragon which transforms Dracula into his dragon form, and dodo eggs which will summon birds to hunt down secrets. One other notable change is the ability to disable QuickTime events for people that just don't really care for them. The graphics, while detailed and well animated, are extremely dark and are sometimes hard to see. The visuals actually look slightly worse than the first game for some odd reason, but the frame rate is more consistent. Once again, the PC version runs at 60 frames per second with much better graphics. The boss fights are again absolutely fantastic, with you fighting a variety of new creatures, such as the Toy Maker, who inhabits a variety of mechanical puppets. Another aspect of the game is the stealth mode, in which you have to distract enemies to sneak past them. This piece of the gameplay really doesn't fit into the Castlevania mold. The music is only meh, in my opinion. It just sort of plays in the background with nothing really standing out or anything too memorable. The controls are nice and tight, but the problem is that the levels are extremely too long. Repetition and boredom is soon to set in, similar to when I asked my wife how her day was. I think the game clocks in at about 12 hours, which in my opinion is just way too long for a Castlevania game. There was one DLC story added entitled Revelation, which is a prequel to the main story featuring Gabriel. So we've come to the end of the history of Castlevania Part 4. We have one more installment coming up, so look for it in the next few days. Once again, if you like this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Also, if you would like to support me on Patreon, please check the link below. Thank you so much for watching.